Going to take a look here at some gameplay of Kekianga. Not sure if it's the first title in the series, but the one I'm going to start with here. Start by going a little closer. This is the opening setup for the U.S. It's kind of fixed. Much of the infantry is here, and then a small party is a little further north. Ultimately, games become kind of technical exercises. We look at the forces involved, the terrain, the mechanics, and see how best to utilize these things to achieve our outcomes, obviously winning the game. So we'll get down a little closer on the forces here. The U.S. has infantry in the form of militia, as well as some regular infantry, some cavalry, and the leaders. The natives aren't set up yet, but they have a large amount of infantry and a single leader here, Little Turtle. So what are these counters? What are their capabilities? First off, we have a unit identifier. It's really not that important, but it shows the U.S. units, how they were divided up. This is a leader. 1 is his combat factor, but that only comes into play if he's alone in his hex. The 3 stars are actually not a rank, but that's his movement potential, 3. The red dot next to the 1 indicates that he's a healthy leader and able to affect gameplay, whereas on his reverse side, he's kind of gray. His movement is reduced and he doesn't have the red dot, meaning he can't affect some things. Looking at a native leader, Little Turtle, you can see it's very similar. He has the red dot. His movement potential is expressed by these 3 dots here. Then on his reverse side, you see he looks a little worse for wear. Similar for the infantry here. They have 2 dots indicating their movement potential. 4 is his combat factor. These are regular U.S. infantry forces. The militia has a 3 for its combat factor, and also 2 movement points. Then the U.S. has cavalry. 4 movement points, but only a 2 combat factor. The native units are basically all the same. The warriors have 3 movement points, the 3 dots there, and then 3 combat factor. All the combat units have a reverse side for when they're reduced. They maintain their movement, but their combat factors are reduced. The natives have more units overall, but only 1 leader. And the U.S. has 3 leaders, but also the cavalry and the regular infantry. So at a glance, the natives are faster than the U.S. forces on the whole, but that cavalry is fastest of all. So our challenge is to figure out how to use those benefits for each side. Combat takes 2 forms. Fire combat, which is probably like shooting volleys at each other. Militia and native forces must be adjacent, whereas the regular infantry can be 1 hex in between, so firing at 2 hexes to conduct fire combat. Fire combat is resolved by rolling a single 6-sided die, and you must roll less than or equal to the combat factor of the firing unit. So 3 or less for the natives for the militia here would score a hit. 4 or less for the regular infantry. A leader stacked with the unit confers a bonus. Essentially, it's a die roll modifier, but effectively increases the combat factor by 1 of the firing unit. And of course, certain kinds of terrain are negative effects on fire combat. Natives in the cornfield or in woods here are harder to hit with fire combat. But natives actually have a built-in hindrance in fire combat. They have a 1 to the worse modifier for every fire combat, meaning that even though they are a 3 for a combat factor, they're essentially a 2 when they're conducting fire combat. So they must roll a 2 or less on one single-sided six-sided die to achieve a hit. The other kind of combat is assault combat, and that is kind of what it sounds like. Close-in combat must be between adjacent units. Again, it's a very similar mechanism. You roll one six-sided die, compare the result to the combat factor to achieve a hit. Now this is a little different in that the die roll must be less than the combat factor. So, whereas in fire combat, if you're the militia firing there, if they rolled a 3, that would be a hit because it's less than or equal to in fire combat. In close-in combat, assault combat, it must be a 2, less than the combat factor. Friendly leaders, again, confer a bonus, basically increasing your combat factor by 1. And that's actually a good and important distinction. This is actually a wounded leader. He's reduced. Only healthy leaders confer that bonus. Whereas natives were disadvantaged in fire combat, they are slightly advantaged in assault combat. When they are attacking from the cornfields here, there are cornfields here in the south and then in the north, or from the woods, they get a bonus. They get their combat factor increased by 1. So natives are poor at fire combat, better at close-in combat in the close terrain. The results of combat when you achieve a hit are kind of progressive and cascading. The first hit results in a disruption of the unit. The main effect of disruption is that it reduces the unit's movement by 1 and interferes with its ability to conduct fire combat. It does not interfere with the ability to conduct assault combat. A hit on a disrupted unit will reduce the unit and leave them disrupted. A hit on a disrupted, reduced unit causes it to become routed. The effect of routed is that the unit really can't perform any functions at all. It can't move, it can't fight. It only has a special movement at the end of the turn where it moves 2 hexes in the direction of its sort of safe zone. That's north for the natives and south for the U.S. And finally, one last hit on the reduced and routed unit will eliminate that unit, take them off the board. Now, units can be rallied. It's not a permanent or one-way state. You can be disrupted and then be rallied back to good order. Now, once you're reduced forever. But if you're routed, you could rally once to disrupted and rally again to good order and reduced. But of course, your first hit would make you disrupted and reduced. Second hit would then make you routed. And the third hit would remove the unit. And similarly, leaders can be wounded if they are in a combat that causes a reduction or a rout. I'm not sure, but anyway, if they're in a combat that causes a loss, you roll a die and see if they are affected. And they can be reduced, and then their second hit would eliminate them. Aside from just getting units off the board, the big effect of both eliminated units and leaders is on morale. The system has a morale level of 1 to 6 maximum. So both sides start out at a 4, and losses of units or leaders causes either increases or decreases to the morale level. As soon as the side loses 2 non-cavalry units, they lose 1 morale level, and the other side gains a morale level. Similarly, when a leader is removed or eliminated, again you would lose a morale level or gain a morale level. Correction, you only lose morale when you lose a leader. You don't gain when you eliminate someone else's leader, the enemy's leader. And the natives get a special morale bump when they eliminate a cavalry unit. So eliminate 1 cavalry unit, the natives will gain 1 morale level. The U.S. gets a similar sort of special morale boost when all of the camp hexes are abandoned by the natives for the first time. So I don't believe the U.S. actually has to occupy the hexes, they just have to be abandoned by the natives. So what's the effect of these morale levels? When you have a large enough disparity, say in this case, more than double is how the rule reads. So in this case, there's a morale level of 2 and 5. That's more than double. The units of this side, this happens to be the natives, would get a bonus in assault combats. They would get a +1 for the better in their assaults on U.S. units. And the other aspect is rallying forces. A rally is made not against the individual unit, but against the morale level. So you must roll less than or equal to the morale level. So obviously as your morale starts to dip, it's harder to rally your forces. And if you can push it up to the maximum of 6, well, they automatically rally. Unfortunately, I neglected one important detail when discussing the combat system. And it's subtle, but it's really important. Obviously, when you're conducting fire combat, loosing a volley at someone, you don't expect any of the balls to bounce off and hit you. So when you're conducting fire combat, there's no chance of any damage to the attacker. There's only a chance of damage to the defender. But in assault combat, there is a small chance of damage to the attacker and not the defender. It's still weighted reasonably towards the attacker, but there still is the chance that you could suffer damage in an assault combat, whereas you will not in the fire combat. So with all that in mind, what is the best way to go about achieving our wins here? Put the U.S. forces back. They're set up. Don't have the natives set up anywhere yet because thinking about how to play them is going to drive how I set them up. Historically, the natives were pretty aggressive. They fought pretty far forward, spent a lot of time in these cornfields, and also fought pretty hard against this advanced group here. But the combat system tells me that being out in the open is pretty bad. The best place for them to be is really in the woods. They get defensive benefit against the fire combat, and they get the offensive benefit for themselves in close combat. But they don't want to give up the village hexes. They give up the camp. They give up 1 morale level immediately to the Americans, and that's definitely not in their best interest. So what to do with the natives? Keep them out of the open areas. They're too good a target for the Americans if they stay out there. But also occupy the villages some to make sure to deny that morale level bonus to the Americans for as long as possible. So that really means we're going to probably spend a lot of our time in the cornfields here, and possibly in the woods here next to the camp. So I'm going with this as an opening setup. A large number of the natives are going to be in the cornfields here. This should give them an advantage, make it hard for the U.S. to get through this line, since it'll be hard for them to fire, but to the benefit of the natives to assault out of that terrain. And then I'm going to try to protect the villages on this side, and maybe take Little Turtle and go really hard at this detachment over there. And for thing I forgot to mention, number 2, there is no stacking except for leaders with units. There are no zones of control. You can just run right by someone. And there's no facing. So that led me to sort of wonder, what do I do with my increased maneuverability, both for my natives and my U.S. cavalry? If I can't get on someone's flank and gain an advantage, what do I really get out of it? That's something I've struggled with as I've played, to try to see how to maximize the advantages in maneuverability that largely lie with the natives, but then a little bit with the cavalry. Play is divided into turns. As noted by the track here, there's 8 turns. And each turn is divided into rounds, and then each round provides a number of activations for one side or the other. The rounds and the activations are controlled by a deck of cards. For a standard deck, you remove all the face cards, divide them up into a stack of black, a stack of red, put one joker into each deck, shuffle them up, and then you start to pull cards off the deck. I don't have a deck of cards. I've got my little electronic card drawer here. So this is my native deck, and that's my U.S. deck. I would draw a card off of each. Oh, well, you know, a 10. Okay. The idea that the player that draws the highest card wins the draw and has the ability to then activate units equal to the value of the card. Now, the rule around ties is that the player that did not get to activate in the previous round wins the tie. Well, I don't know what to do on the first round tie. So I think I'm going to just call that a loss and draw the next. So I drew a joker. Now, the first joker drawn allows that player to roll for a random event. The second joker drawn terminates the rounds and ends the turn. So the jokers are the things that sort of control how long the turn lasts, how many card draws there are, and then therefore how many potential activations there are. So when you know I get 2 weird card draws right off the bat. That's the nature of the deck. It's actually a big part of how the game flows. Just the nature of the shuffle and the draw of the deck. And the random events are slightly unbalanced in the sense that there are 3 random events that affect the natives, 2 that affect the U.S., and then a no effect event. And the general idea is that you can roll a random event and earn the right to re-roll a particular combat roll for that turn, or you can flip back a reduced unit to its normal side. That can occur once per game, whereas the die roll can occur once per turn. And that just adds a little bit of variability into the gameplay. So this is the native deck. The native will get to roll for a random event. Throw a die. It's a 3. And 3 is the random event that says any one Native American unit's combat factor that is with a leader can increase their combat factor by 1 for the rest of the turn. So really that is this unit here with Little Turtle will now, instead of being a 3, will be a 4 combat factor. I don't know how best to remember that. there aren't any markers in the game to do that, so I'm just going to throw a blue marker on that. Hopefully I'll remember what that means. So with the first joker drawn, we know the second joker is out there somewhere that will end the turn. Could be high in the deck or low, we don't know, but we'll just draw our next cards. So finally, we actually are going to have some activations. The red card wins, 6 greater than 3, so he gets 6 activations, and that is the native player. So what are activations? Well, there are basically 5 things you can do with the unit. You can move, you can conduct fire combat, conduct assault combat. Cavalry have the ability to move and assault in one activation, or you can rally a unit. So the native player can take 6 activations, any one of those things, with 6 units. That's something that's a little unclear in the rules. It was cleared up by the designer, and I think on Consim World. Every unit can be activated once per round. So the native has 6 activations. They can activate 6 different units. They can't activate one unit 6 times. Honestly, I'm not sure I want the first activation here as the native. I think historically they did contest the crossing here, but I know from the gameplay that if I move my units out in the clear here, they're going to take a pretty heavy fire, an effective fire, at no risk to themselves, from the American forces. So I'm not sure what my best move is. One other thing that's not clear from the rules, I might have to ask a question, is whether or not I'm able to pass any of my activations. So I have 6 activations. I actually don't know that I want to take all 6 on this first round. So can I just use one and throw the 5 away? It seems to make sense. I should be able to do that. I mean, these aren't automatons. I should get to decide. So I think I'm going to probably move up my native units right there. That's 4. And I'm going to discard the remaining. So I'm going to call that the end of that round and draw the next cards. This time I drew a 4 for the US and a 3 for the native, so that gives me 4 US activations. So I've got the large number of units here and 3 over here. So I think I could move each of these units here. That's 2 activations. I'm going to fire with this unit here at that native unit across the river. I do that by rolling the die, and I rolled a 5, so that's a miss. And then I have one more attack that I can undertake. Or, excuse me, one more activation. So I think I will move the regular infantry across the river there. Now they have 2 movement points, and basically each hex is 1, except for woods, which costs 2. But it also costs 1 to cross a river, so the American infantry can only get 1 hex there. So again, that's the end of that round. Is an ace a face card? I've decided it's not a face card. So I have 20 cards in the decks. As we draw, that means there's going to be potentially 18 rounds each turn. I say 18 because there's 2 jokers and neither yield activations, and that's a maximum. If you happen to have your second joker last in someone's deck, you get the maximum of 18 rounds. But if it's anywhere else, of course, it'll be fewer. So I drew a 3 for the US and an ace for the natives. So we're going to conduct, I think, 3 fire combats, the militia here against the native units. So that's just 3 die rolls. I'm going to fire this guy here, that unit, roll a 1, and that results in a disruption. I'm going to fire the second militia unit with Hall. That effectively is a 4 against that unit, and I rolled a 2. So that's a reduction. That poor unit took a real beating. And I've got that last unit right here firing on Little Turtle and his unit. And we rolled a 2. So again, another disruption. It's a very effective fire there by the U.S. against the natives. And I'll bring that round to a close. So I think you can see how play progresses. You also see that with the large number of cards and the large number of draws and potentially a large number of activations. I mean, we saw 2 10s come up in our first draw, but there are still some 9s and some 8s out there, so that's going to be almost all units on both sides getting a chance to activate. That a lot of things can happen, and it's not exactly slow, but it's not fast either because of the number of rounds that you can potentially play. So I'm going to go ahead and sort of start to pick things up a little later in the game. We'll just take a look at, see how things progress, rather than, you know, follow turn draw at a time here. Here we're looking at the beginning of the 4th turn, completed 3 turns. Didn't really keep track of how many rounds or activations were completed. There were a whole lot. Most of both decks were cleared for each turn. First thing to note is the state of the morale levels. The U.S. has bumped up to 6. The natives have fallen to 3. See, the natives have abandoned the villages, so that gave 1 bump to the U.S. But also, the U.S. managed to eliminate 3 native units. So, 1 morale level per 2 losses is what put us in the situation we are. The natives have remained bunched up in the cornfield here, trying to fight for this area. They're doing okay. They've inflicted some disruptions and some reductions on the U.S., but no serious damage. Unlike the U.S. here at the villages, the attempt by Little Turtle to defend this area has gone pretty poorly. All 3 of the native losses have occurred here. So trying to defend forward at this river, which I believe this is the St. Mary's River right here. Historically, I think they tried to attack and hit the Americans as they came across that river, and not working out so well. So I think the natives will continue to fight it out in the cornfields here. That's their best location. Probably going to focus on this cavalry and that reduced militia unit. Get some losses piled up. They did manage to wound a leader here, so he's not going to be very effective anymore. And also reduce the regular forces. It's all kind of historical right there, given how badly the regular U.S. forces fared in this battle. And really, the fight here around the camps is fairly historic as well. So we're probably going to pull the natives back, maybe up to the cornfields, probably keep them in the woods as much as possible, and force the U.S. forces to chase them. So we'll go ahead and play another turn or 2 here. Catch up later. Here are things at the beginning of the 7th turn. Completed 3 turns, sort of. The 6th turn was sort of strange because the deck laid out very, very oddly. The first native card was a joker. The second U.S. card was a joker, so ended the turn without any activations. There was plenty of activations before that. Kind of see how the things have changed. Down in that cornfield in the south, the natives have largely cleared it of all the U.S. forces. I'm going to assume that these hexes are playable south of the river. The U.S. did lose 1 militia unit. The cavalry is reduced. There's another reduced militia unit here, and then reduced regulars. So they have all sort of fallen back, trying to get away from the surging natives. See, these 2 units here are actually native reinforcements. slightly different color, the green face paint. So they get another leader and 2 units. 3 were available, but because they were at a deficit morale level, they sacrificed 1 unit. Go up. In the north, the Indians, oops, I said that word, the natives, did manage to clear out largely, make for the cornfields. Not a lot of damage went on here, mainly because the natives were in the woods here and were able to withstand the U.S. assaults. So with 2 more turns, it actually is looking kind of historical in the sense that there are fairly significant losses on both sides, more reduced U.S. units than native, though the natives have lost more. But they both sustained a lot of casualties in this battle. And also I'm seeing the U.S. forces pull back, mainly because they don't want to lose either morale levels or victory points. These are, subject to large victory points to the native if they lose any more of these units, and they want to preserve that. So it kind of causes the U.S. to pull back, kind of as they did historically. So we'll try these last 2 turns and see how it ends up. And this is the end of turn 8. The U.S. ended up taking quite a beating here. Hall's force up there is still fairly intact. Haven't lost any units, though they've taken losses. But down here in the south, basically Willis and McMillan are gone. There's 1 unit and the 2 leaders right here. Otherwise the rest have been eliminated. That's including the regulars and the cavalry. Victory points are awarded for eliminated units, reduced units, wounded or eliminated leaders, and a special value is given to the U.S. regulars and cavalry. So the natives really cleaned up. They end up scoring 19 victory points for all the losses to 12 for the U.S. So those are the final losses, with the cavalry and regulars being especially valuable. 4 losses to 5. The natives also had 4 reduced units to the U.S. 3 reduced units. Overall, I think the game plays pretty well. The card draw mechanism makes it very unpredictable. On the surface, it looks like there's a tremendous amount of damage you have to do to eliminate units and gather victory points and affect the morale levels. But that actually kind of plays out in this card draw mechanism. Just the nature of the beast, we'll see multiple draws for one side and multiple rounds, and that forces you to make decisions. Do you keep going hard at your enemy when you think you have an advantage, at the risk of leaving yourself disrupted and vulnerable? Do you rally to mitigate the risk to yourself and then give your opponent a chance to recover themselves? So it kind of keeps that back and forth pretty tense. The one thing I've struggled with is it ends up being kind of static. There's no reason whatsoever for the natives to leave the cornfield here. Sure, they want to try to hold on to the village to keep that morale benefit from getting to the U.S., but eventually that's going to happen, so sort of what difference does it make if it happens sooner or later? So you end up clumping together here in the cornfield, or in this cornfield up there, and then just taking pot shots at each other. The U.S. doesn't want to shoot at them in the cornfield. They want them in the clear, but they don't really have a choice. There's no way for them to maneuver the natives out of these terrain features. So they end up just sort of sticking together right here and pounding on each other until someone starts to break. I think it's a little odd that in assault combat, being disrupted or routed doesn't confer any benefit to the other side. You'd think a routed unit would be more susceptible, and maybe a disrupted unit would be less capable of attack, but there's no modifiers there, so it seems kind of strange. You get guys into a disrupted state, and you may as well just keep attacking with them. Sure, there's a risk that they could roll that 6 and harm themselves, but that's a pretty low risk. Another thing that I thought was, I don't know if it's missing, but I reached a point where, I mean, like the historical campaign was pretty muddled. They didn't know exactly what they wanted to accomplish. So they were going to sweep in here, teach the natives a lesson, and then just sort of leave. They didn't really have any plan of conquest. It was more of a punitive mission. So I got to a point where I had done some damage as a U.S., and I just wanted to withdraw. But there's no specific rules allow me to exit the board and sort of enter, retreat and end the game. I just had to keep fighting, and I sort of didn't know what to do at that point. And I think I played the U.S. very poorly and took more casualties than I needed to, because I just didn't quite know what to do at that point. So I might conjure up some notion of, a withdrawal option for the U.S., and maybe that costs them victory points. The earlier they do it in the game, the later they do it, the less it costs them. But that way they can conduct their mission, maybe inflict some damage. They managed to eliminate most of those native units pretty early on, and that would have achieved their objective. And then they could have withdrawn. And it may have been a wash. Maybe they would have lost anyway, but it just feels like it's more in keeping with what actually happened. So I think I'll take a few more cracks at this, mainly with the object of trying to find a winning strategy for the U.S. I think I read somewhere that the designer tried to give about a 40% chance, that's a rough number, for a U.S. victory. So discovering that, I think, will be the final challenge with this particular title.